talk more about foreign interference and what comes next with three members of Parliament. Liberal MP Talib Noor Mohammed sits on the Public Safety Committee. Michael Barrett is the Conservative ethics critic, and in Burnaby, BC, Peter Julian is the NDP House Leader. Good to see all three of you.
Nice to see you.
Good to be with you.
Mr. Noor Mohammed, I want to start with you. Mr. Johnston has, of course, resigned. Minister Dominic LeBlanc says an inquiry is on the table, that he's getting advice, that he wants input from opposition parties who are all demanding an inquiry. So what is stopping the government from saying yes to a formal inquiry?
I think, first of all, it's important. I mean, I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Johnston for the work that he did, for the service he did to this country. And it is a shame that things played out as they did and people chose to play politics with this. Look, we are where we are, and I think the path forward is what's important. What's important is to ensure that there is a process, given where we are, that everyone can agree to, and that public process, whatever that looks like, is something that gets underway in due course. It's also important to note that at no point had anybody said that they were opposed to moving forward with the inquiry. The idea was to let Mr. Johnston finish his work, and then we would see what the recommendations were. But I think it's an important step forward. If everyone is willing to work together to agree on what the future process, whatever that looks like, might look like in terms of a public process, I think that's a good thing for the country. It's a good thing for ensuring that there is no daylight. There should really be no daylight between any parties on how we chart the course forward, because that's really the most important thing in ensuring that Canadians feel confidence in our systems, but also in knowing that we're going to keep protecting our democracy.
Okay, Mr. Barrett, let's talk about these talks. Have you started conversations with the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, or have you even talked to the government on some of these specifics? Where are you in terms of putting forward some detailed demands on what you would like to see?
Well, for several months, the majority of members in the House of Commons have been calling for there to be a public inquiry. The House voted 3 times by majority for there to be a public inquiry. So we're now at a point where the government has seen that the individual that they appointed, who was inappropriate for the job based on the conflicts of interest and the ties to the Prime Minister, is no longer in that position. And frankly, that was also, the House called for Mr. Johnston to no longer be in that role. So we've been calling for this public inquiry to take place. We've said that we want the opposition parties, all of the recognized parties in the House of Commons, to be able to have their input, have their say on who is going to lead this public, transparent process, because we've seen what happens when the will of the majority of the elected officials in the House of Commons is ignored by the government, which the Liberals have been doing. It undermines Canadians' confidence. We have a majority of Canadians who are calling for a public process. So these conversations are going to happen now between the opposition parties on who appropriate candidates would be to lead this process, and we'll present those to the government and hope that several months into this, where since we've all been calling, opposition parties have been calling for a public inquiry, the government's now finally prepared to collaborate and come to the table, that we're able to get this underway very quickly, because it's important that we have a public inquiry and we have that report before Canadians head to the polls next. This is critical so that Canadians can have confidence in our democratic institution, and to this point, the process that the government has used has not contributed to the healthy discourse or healthy confidence in our democracy.
Okay, Mr. Julian, I want to ask you about these conversations as the House Leader. Who are some of the names that the NDP is going to be putting forward as a potential successor to Mr. Johnston in this process? And what are the concrete elements you would want to see in a potential inquiry? Have those demands changed in light of Mr. Johnston's departure?
Well, I remind everybody that it was the NDP, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, that brought forward both the most important motions that were voted on by all members of the opposition and all independent MPs. In fact, all MPs with the exception of the Liberals. The last one last week did ask Mr. Johnston to step aside, and I believe he's done the honourable thing by following the will of Parliament. We called for that public inquiry, and we also provided a work plan which the House of Commons can do to committees, to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, both to find an individual or individuals and to look at the mandate. As far as the NDP is concerned, there are a number of noted people that could fulfill that role wonderfully. And those are discussions that we'll have with the other parties. But as far as the mandate is concerned, from the very beginning, the NDP has said we need to be looking at all facets of foreign interference. There has been, of course, the Chinese interference that has come to light, those allegations. There's Russian interference. It played a key role in the 2016 American election and the Brexit referendum. This is something that we cannot neglect. And the diaspora groups, Canadians of Indian and Iranian origin, have flagged concerns about possible interference from those governments. So we need to be taking a large look at foreign interference. We need to be doing it quickly. We've had public inquiries that have lasted 9 months. In this case, what I think we need to do with that individual or those individuals that are appointed to head up the public inquiry, we need to be looking at a short but thorough job that is done so that all of those recommendations can be implemented prior to the next election. I think we all believe that we need to have a federal election that is free from any taint of foreign interference. The best way to do that is to move forward quickly with the public inquiry, do it thoroughly, and then implement the recommendations that come out of that.
Okay, Mr. Nur Mohammed, I want to go back to you because you've now heard different views from the Conservatives and the NDP, some different ideas. Is the government putting the onus on opposition parties to come back with some ideas on moving forward, even though ultimately it is the government that's going to decide whether or not to strike a public inquiry? It's not the role of the opposition. What's going to happen if the government doesn't like what it's hearing about what's being proposed, if there is no consensus?
Well, I think it's important to remember that since day one, we've been saying that this should be a nonpartisan we should be taking a nonpartisan approach to this. We should not be partisan in our outlooks. And so if everyone is coming to this with the same objective, and that is to ensure that we are safeguarding our democracy, to ensure that we are working hard to send a clear signal that no one, no foreign power will be allowed to damage, interfere with our democracy. I think we need to be very clear that that is something that we need to all be focused on. Then it should be quite easy for everyone to come to the table with an open mind and come up with a process, recommendations that we can agree on. And I think this is important, right? I mean, there has been a tremendous amount of pressure being placed on all quarters from all sides to get this right. And so if everyone is coming to this with the best of intentions, I'm confident that in the spirit of democracy, in spirit of concern for this country, we should be able to reach a consensus.
Okay, Mr. Bear, you talked about the timeline. Is it realistic to have a public inquiry in a tight time frame? Given the concerns about top secret material, given the concerns we've heard from some diaspora groups about the hesitation to give public testimony and whether some extra measures need to be in place. How are you going to balance that?
Look, there's a number of precedents where secret or top secret information has been reviewed for public inquiries, and that we're able to do that as a country without revealing sources and methods. We can also, of course, balance the needs for the protection of individuals who are under threat from dictatorships like the one in Beijing. We need to do that. The government also has a responsibility to use other tools that they've so far been hesitant or refused to implement, like having a foreign agent registry. We've heard from members of the of different diaspora groups, particularly the Chinese diaspora group, that they want a foreign agent registry. We need to have those tools as a country. Our law enforcement agencies need them. But to your question on if this can happen quickly, absolutely it can. We have judges in this, federal judges in this country who review designated material. There's a number of different scenarios where we can move through this in an expeditious fashion, while balancing, of course, the need for security, but also the need for restoring and maintaining Canadians' confidence in our democratic process.
I'm going to have to just break in right now. We are almost out of time. I do want Mr. Julian to be able to get the last word in on this in the moment we have left. What about these concerns about an expedited process, and how you're going to address that?
Well, these are concerns that were raised with Mr. Johnston's approach, and he didn't have an answer to it. The issue of the diaspora communities is something that can be treated in a public inquiry as confidential, sensitive, secret information, which public inquiries have done in the past, and they've treated that information separately. It certainly made sure that information is something that helps to drive their their conclusions and recommendations. But we have the ability to do this. If the government is now open to the NDP proposals that we've brought to Parliament now twice, then that is a good thing. And I believe, sincerely, we can find a consensus. We can find the one individual or the three individuals that would be most appropriate. We can agree on a mandate, and we can move forward.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there for tonight. Thanks to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.